you all might know Mike, of course, as Chief Product Officer of Anthropic, but you were also a Sequoia founder at one point. Is that right?
Yeah.
And for a hot week. And what was that company?
It was Instagram.
Instagram. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Mike, Lauren, take it from here.
Thank you for joining, Mike.
Yeah, happy to be here. Hey, everyone.
So those of you who may not know, but Mike is actually a content nerd, so it's pretty fun to have the AI filmmaker ahead of us. Where do you think the world of AI content is going?
I think regardless of like the medium or how much AI is being used to create things, I think you'll keep coming back to like, is there a story being told? Is there a person behind the content that people can connect to and ultimately like react to over time? And so it's like another tool in the toolbox of a storyteller.
And I'm curious how you guys think about, as you build more content, as more pixels get generated, how do you help people build control? Like Anthropic has done a really nice job of helping us understand models with mechanistic interpretability and where are models. How do you make Golden Gate Claude? How do you think about giving that option to your users and your customers?
Yeah, I think, there's probably things that are useful at a point in time right now. Like there's, talk about watermarking and like, oh, is this AI generated? But, and maybe this was in the conversation earlier today. I wasn't here in the morning, but the majority of content will be AI generated. So the distinction of like, was this made by AI or not, I think is going to be a not useful one. I think there will still be interesting questions of like derivation and provenance and those kinds of things. They can get easier with AI. I mean, it's funny to bring it back to blockchain, which I feel like is not a cool thing to talk about anymore, but like was like theoretically one of the problems that was being solved with blockchain is probably much more doable when like the entire end-to-end pipeline is bits. But yeah, I think like the things that were important in the past world, like what did you source? Like, is there a citation? Like when I think about like documents, it's still important and more doable now. But like whether it's AI generated, I think is like not the interesting question going forward.
Interesting. And so let's dive into Anthropic a little bit and some of the products you guys are building there. You guys have done a really nice job with artifacts, with the coding models, with MCP. I'm curious for you as the chief product officer, what your framework is for building products and how do you make them admit the products better than just the model itself?
Yeah, I think, I guess two thoughts on this. Like one is the things that were useful in the Instagram age are still useful now, right? Which is like, are you solving a real problem for people? Like if you're creating a developer tool, are you enabling you to do something interesting and novel and quickly? If you're building an end user product, like are you meeting the needs of people where they actually are? So I think that like remains as important now as it ever has been. I think what's different and a lesson I had to unlearn is like on Instagram, we did a much more sort of tops down, 3 to 6 month time frame, of planning. Thomas in the third row can relate to this. We were definitely much more like planned and deliberate. I think this is true at Anthropic, and in talking to kind of my counterparts in OpenAI at other places, like you just have to allow for much more bottoms-up creativity because I think the best products are the ones that are built very close to the model, and you can only kind of tell what they're capable of like pretty late in the process. And so I've just learned to kind of invert the sort of part of the like creative process to be much more bottoms up, which, as like a bit of a control person, it's like a little hard, but I think it's also like opened up some really interesting things. Like Artifacts was a research prototype that then got taken up by like a designer and an engineer and then shipped to production. I think I've heard that story, not just from us, but from other like creators in the space as well.
Could you actually give us some examples? I'd be curious, maybe MCP is one of the more interesting products the whole industry is starting to adopt. Where did that come from and what's the story?
Yeah, it's funny for MCP because I actually like recently half of my job is making memes and sharing them internally. And I was like making a meme around like when MCP was created. It was like a twinkle in like two people's eyes. And I was like, went back and it really started from like watching us try to implement, I think at the time we were implementing like Google Drive integration. And then we were implementing GitHub integration. And like those things should have more in common than not, right? It's like you're bringing context into the model. And we had done like two completely different implementations internally. And the third one that we were like queuing up was going to be like yet another completely, bespoke thing. And, usually like my general pattern is like do things 3 times, and on the third time you can try to figure out what the abstractions are. And this is definitely that case where it's like, all right, what is in common here and where are things going? But it definitely was not like a top-down, like we need a protocol for like better interacting with models. It was, again, 2 engineers being like, yes, I think this is a good idea. Let's go prototype and build it. And then like just spending the time to like, let's make the protocol better. Let's like make it truly open so it's going to get adopted beyond Anthropic because we think there's value in not just us like owning a protocol, but instead it being much more standardized, and then iterated on from there. And now it's gotten much more of a community flavor where, Anthropic, we're over 1,000 people, but still feels very startup-y. like we're working with like places like Microsoft and Amazon that have like all sorts of 4-letter acronyms. Like, I actually was going to cite them, but I don't even remember some of them. But it's like deep, authentication, like identity management with Exchange servers. I'm like, these are not the considerations that we think of a priori, but they are when you actually open it up to a broader group.
Yeah, that's awesome. And where do you think it goes from here? It's been interesting to see a lot of the people in this room adopt MCP. You guys had a new release, I think, yesterday around integrations. So like once you have the seed that comes bottoms up, how do you nurture it and grow it?
Yeah, I think the two areas like MCP adjacent I get most excited about. One is around just taking action. So a lot of like view one of these projects was around like how do you bring context into the models? Like we launched our integrations where you can pull in like GitHub, you can launch like Zapier actions. But I think like the write mode or like the actually taking actions is going to be much more important going forward, because ideally you want these things to act agentically, not just in retrieving, but also being able to automate workflows. The second one is like when MCPs and just agents more generally interact with each other and what the right protocol is. It feels early to try to standardize this too much. Like I know Google's doing agent to agent. Like I think we're still exploring what like the right patterns are. But that I think is going to be very interesting. Like internally we talk about like at what point will your agents hire other agents and what does that economy of, of things even look like. So that is what I get really excited about going forward.
That's awesome. So at this point, you guys have done an amazing job with your coding products. That feels like it's more than just bottoms up, a couple people tinkering with it. I'm curious how you think about it as a focus and what you guys have gotten right so far.
Yeah, I mean, even coding, like I have a lot of awe of watching our researchers. Like, it's also, you can have a top-down sort of like idea of where to go, but so much like research innovation comes from like a couple of people, pushing the boundaries of RL, like Dan was talking about earlier, right? Like, there's like a lot of these things come from discovery, and that process needs to be pretty much bottoms up. I think a thing that we've tried to do well on the coding side is not just focus on the benchmarks, but also really like, is it generating code that people like working with, or is it generating good outcomes as well? And so that's like a thing that we'll definitely continue to push on as well. But it's been interesting, like, we definitely did not coin like the term vibe coding. I think that has like its natural limit in terms of like, but it can create interesting things, but is that like the way you're going to want to do an entire like code base with like a team of 100? Like definitely not, right? And so I think we're internally figuring out what the role of like generating code is within our code base. Like we use it a ton. Over half of our pull requests are Claude code generated. Probably at this point, it's probably over 70%. But what does that mean for code review is something that we're figuring out. Like you can get Claude Coder Review or PR, but then it's like turtles all the way down. And like at what point do you have that like oversight around like, is this like going to lead us to an architectural dead end? Does that matter if you can like overpower the usual like tech debt rewrite with AI coding? Like and I think probably other folks like in labs working on like coding models, like kind of patient zero for some of these, for better and for worse.
I was actually very curious to hear about some of the second order effects of coding agents getting much better. Like code reviews is one. Like I'm curious, as more everyone can write software, where do we go?
I mean, internally, I think like what I'm realizing is like it makes all of your other inefficiencies as a product organization like extremely painful, because now it's like the alignment meeting is like, it's not just standing in the way of like an hour of engineering work that would happen. It's like standing in the way of like the equivalent of like 4 or 8 hours, And so I think it's made it like, I think our product organization is going to break very much so with faster with code gen. It just makes it very painful when you're like it's even more wasted time with like driving alignment, and the models are not helpful with that, really. I mean, they can synthesize meetings, they can maybe like tee up the next conversation, but they're not yet at the point where they're like organizationally driving decision making.
Interesting. I mean, you guys are using a lot of Anthropic at Anthropic. These are a couple examples. I'm curious, what are the things that you're doing or that you've tried in the last 6-12 months that everyone here should be using with your models or others to make them work better?
I mean, I think what's been cool has been seeing like different disciplines inside the company that are not technical start using the models a lot. And whether that's, people in sales using it for meeting prep, and, they start from just using like what's available, and then it's like some blocker becomes really apparent, then maybe we'll build something bespoke in there. So that's been interesting, but it's still less evenly distributed than you might expect even at an AI lab. I think there's, even within a team, like the salesperson that knows how to use it really well, and the people who are like doing it more traditionally, and like that former person might be more effective or more like, hit fewer blockers, but it's not yet like, yes, it's like a requirement that everybody's going to use. Myself, like I just use it as a thought partner. So whenever I write anything, whether it's like a strategy doc or a planning thing or performance review, like I kind of rely. It's almost like the same way that I started feeling weird trying to code on flights, like after Copilot, where you're like, oh wait, I really feel like I'm half the engineer I usually am because this thing is not helping me go through. Like I feel that way now about if I write something and I don't have that extra sort of cycle through Claude, I'm like, this is probably not like getting fully vetted.
Earlier, Sam talked about how people in their 20s are the ones that are using these models the best. You're definitely closer to being in your 20s in your model usage, which is fun to see.
Yeah, although it's like also it'll be very interesting seeing like how people enter the workplace. Like we've been doing more work with universities, and like they'll come into work in a very different way in terms of like the expectation of how much they're going to use Gen AI, and like there not being a stigma for it. This is a big piece. Like some of our most successful internal products are ones that have shared visibility. Like we like do a lot of things within Slack with Cloud integrated with internal tooling, and I've learned that's really helpful for breaking down even at Anthropic this like, oh, did you make that with AI versus like, yeah, I did. Like it saved me like 2 hours. Like of course, like I did like better things to do than like write this performance review or something, right? And so like even watching my time in this like last year and a half of like, oh, I don't know about like Cloud and performance reviews to like now it being encouraged is I think a positive development. Of course, you should read the result and make sure it actually activates. But the thing that was really wacky was we have like an internal thing that can do go across all of Slack and all internal documents, but it's either a public or a private channel depending on how you want to use it. But most people use the public version. And what was happening around performance review season, which was a couple of weeks ago, is people using it to like generate their first drafts, which was like very interesting in public. So I don't know, like I wonder how much people who come up with just the assumption that you're going to use AI for a lot of what you're doing are just going to be more comfortable and not have that stigma around usage.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the early Mid-Journey days.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly. Like that shared visibility of usage is I still think very important. I think we're still at like the very beginning of how people even understand how to use this in their work.
Yeah, it feels like there's a bunch of social opportunities, which we haven't seen a lot of yet, actually.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear what's next for Anthropic. Like you guys have done a lot on code. You've been thinking about the enterprise. Maybe there's more models coming up. Whatever you can share, we would love to hear. And then while he's answering that, we're going to do audience questions after this one. And so start thinking what other people might have to ask, and we'll jump to that next.
Yeah, I think for us, like on both the model and the product side, it's like I know the word agent is like, I'm looking at, David and Roro, and it's like top of mind for a lot of people. I think we want to be as much as possible like powering a lot of that use case. So a lot of the like coding is I think of as the first example of a broader theme, which is can the models work for hours at a time? Like there was the meta chart from earlier, and I think that like is like I'm not going to call it our roadmap, but it is like our goal, which is like, can the models work autonomously for longer? And they're going to need things like memory. They're going to need like advanced tool use. They're going to need to onboard themselves organizationally. Like it stops being just about the model. Also is like the kind of full complement of things that you build around it. Like, is it verifiable? Is like, what does logging look like when you have 100 agents working in your company rather than just one? And like, I don't think we won't play all the parts of that stack, but hopefully we can enable a lot of that through the models and some of the building blocks.
Nice. And do you have any new models coming soon?
Soon, maybe soon. We always have new models coming soon. Yeah.
I look forward to seeing them.
I mean, it's hilarious. People are like, oh, Claude 3.7 is still like 3.7 Sonnet is still the most popular cursor model, and it's so old. I'm like, dude, we released that in February. It's like the pace is very crazy, and we'll have something cool soon.
I'm excited for it. Do we have any questions from folks in the audience? There's one behind you, Daria, too.
It's a comically large microphone. I like that.
It's throwable.
Wait, it's me now?
It's throwable?
Yes.
We need that.
Like, someone behind me, or I'll go? Okay, I'll go. You're a product person. What's what keeps you up at night from a product perspective? Like, what's the hardest product question you're dealing with right now?
I still think, I'll speak for our products, but I think this is generally true. Like these products are really like hard to use effectively for most people approaching it for the first time. Like we'll build things that I think are useful, and then like there'll be good workflows, but it's still a little bit too much of like, if you hold it the right way, you can have like incredible results, but like a little bit off the beaten path, or like if you don't have the insight of like, oh, bring data this way, or like this is what you can do and do these workflows. It still feels very like we're very far from like the first time you open Instagram. It's like, what do you do this thing? You take a photo, and like it's definitely not that. And part of that's being primarily more like work oriented than like pure sort of like personal use case oriented. But that keeps me up at night, which is like there's still a huge overhang of like how models are useful to people and their capabilities today.
So there's a certain future in AI27 that is being predicted, and how does your worldview like match or differ from that, or where do things go?
What's your commentary on that post in general?
I think like there may be two reactions. One, like the importance of compute. It's like it's not a novel or particularly profound statement, but like is I imagine a topic of conversation at OpenAI. It's one at Anthropic as well. So like, what is our current compute story? What's like the next generation of compute? Like, who do we partner with, et cetera? So like that emphasis and the numbers in there are like pretty directionally correct overall. So I thought that was interesting. The one that I think is the most interesting, like open question about whether it will play out this way is the like holding models back from release because they're going to be more useful and deploy internally. I even just saw there's an interview with Mark Zuckerberg like this week at Stratechery, and he was talking about like offering an API for Llama and like the trade-off around like using some of the compute. Like that conversation is happening at every lab, right? Which is incrementally, do you spend the extra time on RL or do you spend that time like with a customer use case, or do you spend it on your next pre-train, and like that allocation of relative compute is going to be incredibly more important. And then at one point you're like, wow, like if we have a very large product that is going to take a lot of inference, and like that's highly profitable and that's useful, but it is like directly taking time from capacity for research, and that's not even like research for the known runs. It's also research for your wacky ideas from the two people in a room that like have an interesting new idea about how to scale that could become the next test time compute. So that was very like closely matched, and it'll be this fascinating, like we're kind of getting in this natural experiment with like Ilya's like SSI not commercializing from the beginning, and like will there be an advantage in that they can throw all of their compute towards training? I don't know. I feel like we've learned a lot from having our models out in the wild. I don't think we would have built like 3.7 Sonnet the way we did it if it hadn't been for the like market feedback and seeing real use cases. So I'm a big believer in having like an offering in the market. So like that's probably the least plausible, but will be interesting to watch over the next few years.
I'm curious in a giant research plus product org how you balance either you could imagine the product defines what sort of research happens and everything is vertically integrated and maybe that's the best product experience versus research which might want to just make the smartest models possible to push the frontier, and then product sort of gets whatever happens and makes do with it. Like how do you think about that?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I think I push our product teams and like in combination with research to be like, if we are shipping things that could have easily been built just on top of our API and have like no other like way in which like at least their initial version wasn't better than what could be done, like what are we doing? It's like we do have like these incredible researchers on the other side. I would not say we were doing like Artifacts is probably the best example of that, where like that was fine-tuned into the model, it's useful, et cetera. But then I think there was a phase where we weren't doing that as much of that, and like I think we're getting back to now being like, all right, a fully functioning product at Anthropic should include applied AI, should include somebody from like we have our Claude Skills team, which is basically like our fine-tuning team to succeed there. But that's still probably only like what 10% of the research team is doing. And then hopefully the other things they're doing are generally useful. Like better instruction following is useful because then we can like do these things overall. But I've always been interested with OpenAI how they have like you'll have like the ChatGPT model that is in the API that presumably not very many people use through the API, but is like available there. And whether we should like also have a like more fine-tuned like product-oriented version. We've gotten away without that so far, which is useful and mostly in compute preservation reasons, but might actually be holding us back for some more differentiated product experiences.
Thank you for taking the time. I was curious how you see kind of we heard Sam talk about being the one subscription for all things AI, kind of integrating into all aspects of life and being that one-stop shop. How do you see Anthropic's positioning relative to that? I guess specifically, I come from a world where I work on Windsurf, where we consume a ton of Anthropic, but then I also use ChatGPT as like my app, right? And so, do you draw a distinction when you're thinking about product strategy, and what are you thinking long term in terms of those two things converging, diverging?
Yeah, I think it's a question I think about a lot. There's what we find is like a lot of people, at least at this phase in the product evolution, like are comfortable like moving across or paying for multiple, right? And I'm sure you guys have seen this as well, where it's like they're not replacement, right? Like people will pay for Windsurf, but also be in like might still subscribe to Claude or ChatGPT in order to get something else met, right? Or like a different workflow. I think that's sustainable in the short to mid run, and maybe in the long run, there's going to be like maybe more desire for consolidation, or maybe we end up with some, maybe this sounds really dystopian, like some version of like the like cable bundle of some of these things where, you know, there's a little bit more of these. We can probably come up with a sexier name than the cable bundle for AI. But there's probably something to that regards. And then there's like the power users for whom like moving across things is valuable. Like we launched Claude Max, and like the top user request was like, can I use this for Claude Code tokens? So we launched that yesterday because it seems like a natural evolution of, yeah, if you're paying $200 a month for Claude, you're not going to probably be able to consume all of it using Claude AI, and that's where the bundle starts being used. So I thought it was interesting with ChatGPT Plus is the highest tier, right? Where there's like, yeah, you can burn that down off of video gen, or you can do it off, you know, on coding use case, et cetera. I think that at least feels valuable. A product idea or concept that we've been thinking about is like, it might be useful to be able to bring your tokens to other products as well, which especially if you're bootstrapping a product and you might not be ready to get somebody to pay $20 to $200 a month, like, but they're already paying $200 somewhere else, like maybe that's a useful way where they can get started.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for being here. What's your take on how agent to agents, the new standard, will play out over time? And should we be waiting for a new standard from Anthropic?
Yeah, we have a lot of sort of wacky internal prototypes of agents talking to each other, which I think will help inform like what are the right primitives that we want to have in there. A question that I don't think anybody has solved yet from a research perspective, at least nothing that I've seen publicly, that is going to be very important, especially when agents start being sort of like your avatar out in the world, representative of you or your company, is like better discernment around like what you reveal and what you engage in, right? It's like, what is like, if you're transacting with a vendor, sure, you can reveal a credit card information, but it's just like some other random agent you're talking to, probably not, right? If it's company to company, what gets revealed and what gets sort of withheld. So that is both a protocol, but I think it's actually like a research question. Like models sometimes like they want to please, so they want to tell you information, but like how do we, or they want to be too, they're going to be too refusal-y if you like never reveal any company information, right? So that sort of nuance and discernment feels unsolved. And then the other one that I like alluded to is just like auditability at scale is something that's going to be really interesting. Again, I think like there will be products built on top of that to solve that need. But I was having a conversation with the founder last week around like, what is identity management for agents? And like, what is, you know, do they have names? Like, I don't know, that feels kind of a little bit too anthropomorphic, but maybe that's useful. But feels like an agent should be better at doing the 100th task than the first, which implies some kind of like longitudinal memory, right? And there's going to be ones that are more like your extension of your work versus ones that are like wholly like an entire other employee, right? So I think those feel less like protocol questions and more like both like product and research questions to me.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for your time. What do you think most people building in the application layer are getting wrong?
I don't know about getting it wrong, but I think a thing I've observed is like products that start sort of AI light and go AI heavy, like tend to put AI like either in like a sidebar or like it ends up feeling like a secondary sort of surface. And then especially as you move more and more agentically, it's like harder and harder to make that like as full featured as you would want it to be. And so that's one thing, which is like, at what point do you rethink the kind of core sort of building blocks of your product to actually be more AI native? I think that's one. The other one is a shocking number of AI like native products don't expose the primitives of the application to the models enough. And what I mean by that is like you ask it something and you're like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't do that for you, Dave, because like it hasn't been built that way. I mean, maybe those 2 points are linked, right? When you build like, I've built a GUI and then like I've stapled a model on top, you don't necessarily think that like that model should actually be your like primary user of your application in a lot of ways.
All right, Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you all.